Hello, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the latest Big Data London webinar. Today, we're talking about how to build an agile and iterative data strategy and team. I'm Andy Steed, Content Director of Big Data London, and I'm joined today by Jason Foster. Hi, Jason.
Hi.
And Barry Green. Hi, Barry.
Hey, how are you?
Yeah, so these sessions are designed to be interactive, so please send in your questions throughout the presentation, and I'll endeavour to ask as many as I can at the end, at the Q&A session. But without further ado, I'd like to pass over to our first presenter. Over to you, Jason.
Great, thanks very much. Thanks very much, Andy. I've just got a few slides to help us get through just sort of framing what we're going to be talking about today, myself along with Barry. Yeah, this sort of idea of building an agile, iterative enterprise or organization, or an organization that's guided by data is a fascinating one to me and the organization that I run, Cynozure. We support organizations to define and deliver data analytics strategies that help to deliver big sort of business value. And you know, this story is fairly probably well understood, but we know as the world has changed over the last sort of 5, 10, 15 years, you know, organizations can no longer stand still. You know, you had blockbusters stood there sort of throwing stones over at Netflix, talking about that's not the future, saying that our way's better, and really rapidly over a short period of time, there was a sort of a big difference in how they performed versus how Netflix performed, and now we know the rest of the story. And this is quite common, and what a lot of this is fueled by, and organizations that are now at the sort of top ranks. And if we had 2020 on here, we would see a similar set of companies that are still performing really well, is that these organizations that are performing well today have been either set up by or are absolutely fueled by data. They are data companies at their heart. They drive because of the data that they've got, the understanding about consumers, the understanding about how we interact, the understanding about what we as people do, and the products and services that will support, and that disruption that we see in the market that's driven the kind of thing that we saw with Netflix and blockbusters. And there are a number of examples, is really sort of telling in terms of what's happening in the market. And there are more examples. You know, Google have us making billions of searches each day because they know the kind of things that we might want to look for, and we can get to it quickly. Netflix has us coming back because they know the kind of content we want to see. You know, Spotify understand our music likes, dislikes, and what other people might like, and they have us going back in our millions every month to go back to their platform. These organizations at their heart are data businesses, and what organizations in the market that are more traditional struggle with is figuring out, how do we change, how do we pivot, how do we catch up, how do we either disrupt or keep up with the disruptors. Now, we're in the middle of and going into one of the deepest recessions that we've seen. We're in the middle of COVID-19, as we all know. We have seen these recessions before. We've seen markets tank, we've seen markets recover, and it takes sort of 1 or 2 years often for the market to come back. So we've seen this kind of thing before that we're in right now. And we know that a lot of organizations that are now really successful came out of a time when there was recession. You know, there was organizations that set up off the back of recession happening, found a niche. And while big organizations are struggling to sort of reduce what they're trying to do, reduce headcounts, clear off some of their non-core operations, there are other organizations stepping up and doing some really interesting and innovative things in digital and in data to try and move the agenda forward, and tapping into the market that exists as some of the traditional players step back and aren't able to perform. So we've seen this before, and we've seen what happens in recession, and we've seen that organizations that can get ahead of this, get ahead of the game, can really start to drive their agenda forward and get in front of what they're trying to achieve. And now there are other examples of organizations that haven't done so well, like the Netflix story. And the key here is the ability to respond, react, be agile, listen to what's happening, see what's coming. Even sometimes that's hard. You can be a bit blinkered. In the case of Kodak, they could have seen sort of the end of analog photos off the back of the 2008 recession. They ditched their digital business because it wasn't core for them at the time. They didn't diversify. They didn't pivot how they wanted to do what they were doing. And we now know that they sort of tanked and became bankrupt off the back of it. So the ability to respond, the ability to change what you're doing, the ability to react, the ability to put data and digital at the heart of what you're trying to achieve as an organization is absolutely king, queen, prince or princess. And that's really important message to come out in terms of being agile and responsive. So the ability to act, think and behave like a startup or a scale up becomes super important to organizations. So this isn't saying traditional organizations need to be a startup or need to set up a startup or anything like that. This is about mindset. This is about culture and mindset of thinking, right, a startup acts in this way, a scale up acts in this way. They test the market, they take new ideas to market, they scale them at the pace that the feedback they get can allow. They focus on outcomes. They focus on the things that are important, which are business value. They're delivering stakeholder or shareholder return. They focus on the really important things that drive their strategy. They analyze data, they analyze information, they analyze what's happening, and they activate that data so that it can really drive some improvements in the way that their business operates. They test, they iterate, they go round this loop of analyzing and activating, and they learn from what's happening. And once they've learned something, they can push it forward and accelerate harder. But really importantly, they communicate, they share the things that have gone well, the things that haven't gone so well. So they celebrate both success and failures. And this ability to sort of start thinking and behaving and setting yourselves up in the way that startups, in the way that scale-ups do, we've seen some really positive results. And Barry here as well, has implemented some of these interesting concepts, and we're going to go through some of the concepts as we move through this discussion. So we've got a couple more things that I wanted to just cover in terms of framing how we start thinking about this, and then we're going to dip out of sort of PowerPoint, and Barry and I are going to just have a conversation about some of the key topics, the key concepts that are important in terms of mindset and the way you operate to start moving in the way that enables you to get ahead of the game and keep ahead of what you're trying to achieve. And that, as I said, sort of starts with thinking differently. There's this. We've all heard the story and have seen probably, and you may be part of organizations that have rushed to bring in data scientists, rushed to buy some technology, rushed to sort of scale a data organization that hasn't necessarily then operated in the most effective way at best, and at worst been an investment that hasn't delivered any value back to the organization. And what's really, really important, and the thing that's at the center of any data strategy, that is the absolute fundamental thing, is about aligning yourself and aligning what you do to the business value that you're trying to deliver. So yes, there's capabilities that you need to build, but what you're building them for is in order to reach some sort of business outcome, some sort of improvement in the organization. And aligning to that business outcome, aligning those outcomes to your business strategy is what really makes and breaks a data strategy. And the problem statement here is quite common, it's consistent. And what this framework, this level up framework aims to do is cover off what are the stages you need to go through to become really successful at data. How do we avoid the blockbuster scenario? How do we make sure that the way we build our data organization, the way we get buy-in from the organization, the way we deliver incremental value is done at the pace that the organization can buy into, the pace that the organization can afford. And if you don't go through the stages, go through all these stages, there will be some problems along the way. So for example, establishing the agenda is all about setting the scene. It's about ensuring you know where you are, ensuring that you've got a clear statement of how you're going to move through this journey, the roadmap that you're going to take in order to deliver your data strategy. You're getting buy-in, you're communicating what it's going to do, what value it's going to deliver, and you're trying to find pockets of gold, pots of gold, where you think you can add business value through the application of data analytics. And what you're trying to achieve here is buy-in at a senior level, strategic buy-in, an understanding of the cost to move through this cycle, these stages, and really importantly, the investment to move at least to the next stage. That next stage of proving value is exactly that. So we've said during establish that we think we can add a certain amount of business value to the organization, 1 million, 10 million, 100 million. It sort of doesn't matter. What really important is that you prove that you can actually get that value, that you can get some of that value, the first pound, the first £100, whatever it is, that you prove value back to the organization, that we can actually pivot, we can actually do something, we can actually apply some data and get some business return, whilst also starting to lay some of the foundations.
Jason, I think it's...
So go on, Barry.
Sorry, mate. I think it's also important here to realise or recognise that you might walk into an organisation and they might have already scaled too early. Yep. They might also have not established all the things they need to establish. And so the good part about this is that you can use this to understand what you have done and what you potentially might need to sort of step back from, and then what new things you might to establish, so that you build the data foundation across the piece with all the components, rather than just focusing on data science or data governance or whatever the hot topic might be.
Exactly. Yeah. The key thing is proving that by doing those things and by investing in those things, you can deliver some business value. So always back to that outcome. And you're right. Once you've proven that point, once you've done a trial that shows you can acquire more customers, reduce the cost of your operation, whatever the thing is, then you've got the right, and you can get the investment to start scaling. And of course, organizations are, everyone knows that data is really important now. There's sort of that's no longer the problem. People know that data inherently is something they should be getting their hands around. Indeed, same with digital. And there's a challenge where organizations then rush to do this scale part without having properly established the agenda, the organization properly understanding, getting and buying into what you're trying to achieve, and having the credibility as a data crew that you can actually do those things. And then once you've done that, then you've got the right, if you like, to really scale up the operation, invest in the data science tools, the data governance tools, the people, putting in different operating models, organizing your company differently so that it can really maximize this stuff. And through that whole thing, what's super important, and Barry, I know you're sort of super hot on this, is that we have to continue to focus on business value, and we'll come back to sort of some of that a bit later. But that's the really important thing. It's not just about sort of delivering capability and building capability. And then this moves through, and it moves through to accelerate, which is once you've got scale, what we need to be able to do is move really quickly. And of course, we want to move quickly through this, but we need to be able to move at pace, and we need to be able to move at pace at scale. And it's difficult to do. Both those things. So we need to lay some really good foundations during scale, so that when we get to accelerate, we can push really hard. And then the lucky few that can get to this sort of really sort of high-end endpoint of some really kind of sexy optimization opportunities. This is where sort of Netflix, Amazon, Uber's, the people that I positioned at the start of this webinar, the few get here. But when you do, this is like really small changes that have massive, absolutely massive return. And again, a lot of organizations we talk to try and get here quickly before they've started doing some of these other things. And what you end up with is a whole bunch of proof of concepts in sort of some neural networks and machine learning and sort of some really interesting and cool stuff, but it's stuck in POC land because there's no way of taking that from that sort of innovation space to being something that's on rails. So think about so what we say is that think about this as a bunch of stages. Think about moving through these stages and trying to get through them nice and pacey. Underpinning that then is the ability to define the strategy that will help you do that. So we've got the sort of top left and bottom right, we've got this idea of understanding where we're trying to get to, the why, the vision of what we're trying to achieve, and the value that we think you can deliver, the pots of gold, the use cases. And at the bottom right, we've got the roadmap, the plan, which is, if you like, the stuff that's on the previous slide. But these other four pillars we have to think about as part of our strategy. And if we miss any of these, whether it's around the team that we've got, the skills that we've got, how culturally they operate, the operating model, which is the way they work, the technology and the architecture that they need, and how we govern data, that roadmap, that plan, that level up framework can't really be progressed. So that's sort of like framing this kind of idea of why we need to be agile, why we need to be iterative, how we can start thinking about that. And we're going to sort of dial off the slides now. Barry and I are going to kick about some of the concepts that are really important when we're trying to act and behave in this way. So the first of these is this notion of collaboration. Collaboration from a culture point of view, Barry, we've talked about before, is one of those things that I certainly find, unless you have a culture of collaboration in your organization, data stuff's really hard.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think data can help you develop that collaboration. So, I think if you look at what I've seen in a lot of organizations where they've set up data science or data governance in silos, it's for data's sake, right? And so therefore they're not collaborating with anyone. They're just trying to drive to an outcome that's good for data. So if I think about some of the examples where, so one of the things I did at Allianz when I first arrived was to cancel all the meetings, right? So that was effectively, and it was cancel all the meetings because we weren't operating like a startup. We were operating like a 200-year-old company. And then get everyone to go away with some specific things and focus on those things and come back with recommendations, so that when as a team we were making decisions, we had engaged with the architects and the IT guys and the change guys, and we were coming back with a very focused, decision point for the team, rather than everyone getting in a room or in a meeting and chatting about some stuff and everyone's views being expressed. So it's very different. So it kind of covers that kind of startup mentality, but also the collaboration happens when you've got some really good ideas and some focused ideas to make some decisions around, not at the very beginning where you're just starting to have a bit of chat about, what do we do next? Everyone's got an opinion, and you don't tend to go very far, very fast when you have that approach, right?
Yeah, I like what you say there, because on one hand, killing all the meetings sounds like we're killing all the collaboration, but actually what you're saying is if we can properly define the roles, responsibilities, and accountabilities of people within the team, and have a flatter structure if we can, and hold people to account to the things that you've asked them to do, then come together to collaborate on the decisions that need to be made. That's a far more effective way than everyone being involved with sort of every bit of conversation that needs to needs to happen.
But it's also about relationships, right? You've got to start establishing relationships. You've got to start communicating clearly. You can't collaborate without communicating, and that doesn't mean necessarily agreeing on everything. But I think often people sort of stick in their silos, and they stick in the areas they're comfortable. And as data professionals, a lot of data people aren't that comfortable kind of going out and embracing the rest of the organization. So I think that collaboration comes from getting out, talking to other people about the business problems, understanding the business strategy like you mentioned before, and really getting to the crux of what the real issue might be.
Yeah, I think there's an important bit there, isn't there, about this isn't just collaboration between data folk, the different teams, and we'll come back to teams a bit later actually, but this is about collaboration as a cultural mindset that an organization needs to have between the various components that make up being good at data, which is commercial teams or business teams, data teams, technology and digital. That's got to come together and collaborate across the data piece. Otherwise, as you say, you're stuck in the silos that you were in before.
Yeah, and I think the other important thing is to recognize that, as a data person, you may have to make decisions that are suboptimal for your data team, but they're optimal for the organization. And I think you've got to have the maturity to kind of make those decisions, because otherwise, if collaboration means you get everything you want, it's not really collaboration, right? Your organization's got to win. You've got to be thinking organization first, or customer first, then organization, then all the way back through your team. So I think that's an important point too, which is often missed, because everyone's like, it's a zero-sum game. So you've got to kind of make sure that the organization's winning. So sometimes you might need to lose for that to happen, right?
Yeah. I think that's, there's a bit of prioritization there, and you've got to be pragmatic about prioritization. It's not always the most perfect, the most value and the most perfect feasibility. Sometimes there's a friction there, and there is just the right thing. But I think it's really important, and sort of maybe aside from collaboration, but it is really important that prioritization takes into account, and that you consciously decide that you're going to do something, not just because the most senior person's asking for it or someone's shouting really loudly, that you're consciously deciding that we're going to take this route for some really sensible reasons. And I suppose that is about collaboration and the understanding between the different teams that these decisions need to be made in the way they need to be made.
Yeah, and I don't like using the word agile, because I think it's a bit overused, a bit like big data used to be. But when you've got an agile team, you've got lots of different people from different parts of the organization working in a really focused group, and you get really good collaboration, and you kind of got to take that concept and spread it out around building relationships, around getting to understand the business. I think you kind of take that out, and the only way you do that is by effectively communicating with people and understanding what the real problems are, and then working out how you solve those problems.
Yeah, I think the other point to sort of round off collaborations, we move on to the next concept, I think, is that part of the reason I think that collaboration's one of the most biggest cultural values that you need in order to be successful as data, is that data, I talk about as being like a horizontal. It's not a silo. It cuts across the organization. The value chain of data goes from creation through to usage, and data moves between departments, between processes. It's handoffs. It goes between stakeholders and customers back into your organization. So it is a horizontal. It has to require collaboration rather than handoff points.
Yeah, agreed. Absolutely right.
Cool. Okay, so the next concept we wanted to cover was this idea of fix forward. So this is the concept that, you know, most organizations aren't digital native. Most organizations, or lots of organizations, I should say, are have legacy to deal with. They have, you know, problems. There's decommissioning plans in place. We've got stuff we've got to work around. So Barry, can you explain this sort of concept of fix forward?
Yeah, so I think fix forward in its simplest form is stop the rot. Right, so if you think about how we've kind of created this legacy, you know, we haven't collaborated, we haven't thought about data at the heart of, you know, most of these things have been driven by systems delivery rather than data and process, etc. And so fix forward's all about saying, okay, so if you're going to implement, if you're an established organization and you're going to implement a whole set of data standards or a data policy, what you can't do is you can't tie the organization up and say you have to implement these things today and they have to be perfect. It doesn't work that way. But what fix forward says is every time you start something new, whether that's a change activity or as part of BAU, you effectively say, what are the data components that I need to engage with, and or, you know, products or services I might need to create, and then how do I then look at what the standard is that we're applying today, and that can't be the standard we apply, so we take it to the next level. So fix forward is all about saying, line in the sand, everything we do from today has to be done in a better way than it was, and it's starting to move us as an organization towards the end state or the data standards, which will obviously, you know, mature as you mature as an organization as well. Yeah. So it's kind of that stop the rot, stop the legacy, stop creating more legacy. So, you know, it's really funny when you look at an organization who spends all its resource trying to fix these legacy problems, and then change programs, all the new stuff they're doing is doing this exactly the same thing that was done to create the legacy. So all you're doing is creating more legacy, right? So you've got it, and it's all about stopping the rot.
Yeah, and I that's important when we think about the concept here, which is being agile and iterative and responsive. Is if you're constantly weighed down, it's like a ball and chain, is if you're constantly weighed down by this legacy, by this decommission plan and sort of whack-a-mole on old systems, whilst, as you say, creating new legacy, you'll never be able to react or be you know, responsive to what's going on. And we've seen certainly in sort of COVID-19 period where some organizations are struggling to accelerate, keep up with the change, keep up with the movement, because they're stuck in some of these sort of legacy platforms, legacy systems, legacy ways of working that just don't lean into, they don't allow them to be, you know, responsive to what's going on in the bigger world. Yeah.
It's an important. It's a really important point, because I think, you know, if you don't establish this concept up front, and you also run the risk of, you know, if you're implementing for a regulatory program, you run the risk of basically doing whatever change you're doing for the regulatory program, rather than creating the right data products and services that the whole organization can eventually use, right? So it's an important point.
Yeah, just on that point on regulation, actually, someone's asked a question around the 6 pillars requiring risk to be sort of flagged on there, and for me, risk is under our sort of governance and data, operating model and data governance. But I think in those regulated businesses, there's a big decision to make about, are we doing this for the regulators or are we doing this for us and our customers? And if one's ahead of the other, you know, how does the other one play out? Because of course you have to meet the regulatory obligations, and I'm sure not everyone listening are in regulated businesses, but that's a really important point. And legacy makes keeping up with regulation harder. You know, new regulation comes out that require you to be more innovative, more agile, more able to respond to what the regulators say.
Yeah, and if you think about the ownership model that we've kind of created, Jason, it's all about creating ownership for process, for systems, for everything in the organisation, having a boundary condition around that ownership, and then effectively tying that to the risk framework. So, you know, you can maintain that asset at the right level year upon year, right? Rather than just, because how many times you get in an organisation where someone says Johnny owns this and Jilly owns that, but there's no boundary conditions. There's no way of actually documenting who owns what, and there's no way of making sure that the person who owns it is actually looking after what they own, what they're supposed to own. Yeah, and that's all about risk management, right?
Indeed, yeah, makes sense. So I thought we'd maybe move on to the next concept here, which is this idea of data products. So thinking and acting and behaving and treating your data outputs, your data products, your data solutions as products in their own right. And obviously that idea of a product, a digital product, has been around for a while in sort of digital development world and building websites and apps and those sorts of things. And I think those that treat dashboards, algorithms, products that you build and serve and create to develop better business outcomes, we think about those as products. And if we think about them as products, there's also this idea of product management that's needed, which is the way we think about, manage and behave and facilitate and prioritize the development of products. So what's your experience at Allianz of sort of creating data solutions as products in their own right?
So we came up with this concept of products and services because what was happening is that everything was a project, and everyone was talking about it's a data project or it's not a data project, right? And every project's got data in it. So, and I was kind of like couldn't get that. So I came up with this thing about products because it's all about reusability as well, right? It's all about saying we build something and then we want to make it usable across the rest of the organization. So if you've got a specific algorithm you built, what you want to do is build a nice GUI on the front end so that you can give it to the business and they can use it on a friendly, usable basis. And then that becomes a product that potentially you can reconfigure and you can effectively, apply it quite quickly. So that kind of comes to that scale piece with other products that you create. So you just feed the algorithm into the GUI and effectively people can start using it and making decisions on a business basis. So it was really about starting to get people to think about data, what you want to do with data, rather than just talking about data. Because if you think about data as a concept, it's almost esoteric in terms of it's so, there's so much data, so many ways you can get to it. But if you think about data as a product, or you create a data product, people kind of go, oh, okay, yeah, I know what that product does. I want some of it. That makes it easier for people to engage with it and ask for the right things rather than saying we need data.
Yeah, it gives you something more tangible to touch and feel, and we've got a bunch of products, and that goes for both creating internal products that are used by your team to make them more effective, to create better products and services for your customers. But likewise, you might turn your data to the industry and monetize it externally. And if you're doing that, then certainly you need to create data as a product, and there's lots of experiences of that. And dunnhumby did that very well with club card data, and lots of organizations since then do a really similar thing. And the way, again, those are successful is to treat that like that externally monetized data product as a product in its own right. Test it, get a minimum viable product out there, make sure it resonates, make sure it gets good feedback, make sure it's used in the way you want, make sure it really adds value to the people that you're selling it to or giving it to, depending on how you do it, and then iterate it, improve it, make it better. So the end result isn't the first thing you deliver. The end result is it's always on, right? You're always improving it, making it better, and iterating it. I think what goes with that, and as per the slide, which I think people couldn't see, but that on this product management point, is that if you're treating data as a product, you need a skill which is probably different from what's been around before, which is product management. And it's a different thing to project management. It's not a scrum master, it's not a BA, a business analyst, but it's this idea of being good at product management and thinking about having product managers, product owners in your data function, whatever that looks like, however you set that up, in your data function, is the way that we get to start to do this, right?
And the sort of data as a startup concept, again, like you alluded to at the start, or said at the start, was that it's not about being a startup, but as you create these products, you're creating something from new, from fresh. You effectively have to iterate it quite quickly, and then you have to manage those things going forward. And that kind of mentality of doing it quickly, et cetera, all ties back to the startup, approach. Which people I think get. So it's not like it's not like an Allianz where we're running around with lots of beanbags and Xboxes and jelly beans all over the place. We're still kind of a traditional company, but in a data team, we're trying to think about how do we create the next data product and how do we do it quickly. It doesn't always work because you're working in a very well-established organization, but you've got to get that mindset embedded, and you've got to get people thinking about products and services. So effectively, they stop talking about just data.
Yeah, no, I think they're right, and the way you can align something to be felt like a product is to align it to a use case, and that use case aligns to some business value, and that business value aligns to some strategy. So there's a simple to say, not always easy to do, but a clear line between the product you're creating and the reason that you're creating it and what your organization will use it for. It's much easier when you can do it that way.
So we describe that as capability. So it's capability build. So we're building a product to kind of improve or provide a new term of capability in the organization.
Yeah, love it, love it. Can people see these slides now?
Yes.
Cool. So let's talk about the next one. So you touched on this a bit. So again, in order to be agile, in order to be reactive and iterative and accelerate at pace and move through that journey that we showed at the beginning, you talked about sort of data products and services. And what's important is the sort of reusability, isn't it? This is about how do we create something once and reuse it, rather than every time we want to build a new ingestion routine, every time we need to sort out some master data, every time we need to fix a data quality thing, we're not having to start from scratch. We're not having to build a project for the first time. So the idea of data services you mentioned and reusability becomes really important to help sort of move through the agenda really quickly.
Yeah, and it's also about making sure that the data team, it's a way of kind of getting collaboration across the organization. Because if you think about data quality, you know, I've been in a couple of places where, you know, they had a data quality team and they did everything. So they didn't ever hand off the profiling to the people who could do profiling and the, you know, the SMEs. They didn't hand off any of the responsibility. So when you set up these services, you can kind of say, right, so we're going to do some data quality. It's your data. You're the critical data owner. You want to profile it. Here's some tools. We'll train you on how to use the tools. We'll set up some dashboards for you. It's now yours. It's now part of your BAU process. So you're effectively saying, I've got a commoditized thing that I can spread across the organization and federate that capability out across the organization. Because what we don't want, or I don't think we want, is to build a data team that's so big, right? The organization should have a small, efficient data team that's effectively got the right products and services. That means we can federate that capability across the organization.
Yeah, there's a metric that we use as a sort of growing business, which is revenue per employee, and you can apply the same thing to a data team, which is sort of output, you know, business outcome value delivered per data team. And we've seen some really bloated data functions, and I use the word bloated because they were bigger than they needed to be. Not, you know, that sometimes they need to be large because you're doing a lot, but they were bloated because they didn't have some of these concepts in place. They weren't as efficient as they could be. They'd grown organically over time, sort of constantly adding, you know, as there's a new project that needs to be delivered, a big transformation program, we better pump more people into it because we've got a load of investment. But this is about flipping it around a little bit, reusable, on the shelf things, treat things like products, and we can move the agenda forward that way. Yeah, someone's asked a question, actually. I just want to touch on it because I'm not sure we were clear enough when we were talking about product management. Just wanted to get that in now, which was, so someone's asked, can we expand on the concept of product management? Fundamentally, this is about going, as a data function, we can't just think of delivering dashboards, delivering, you know, data sets, delivering algorithms. The data function should be side by side in partnership with the business problem. So if that business problem is customer retention or customer acquisition, for example, the product management aspect of this is going, we're going to solve the problem of customer retention, not we're going to solve the problem of building a data ingestion routine or a dashboard. So the outcome is what's really important. So just the concept of product management is about focusing on and obsessing about the business outcome that you want to try and get to.
Yeah, I'm just going to talk about the reusability. So one of the most stark examples I've seen was, you know, we all know warehousing is quite complicated in terms of the old style of trying to get all your data into a warehouse. So, you know, what I saw was effectively, you know, you had 4 or 5 different teams trying to get data into a warehouse with no commonality, right? So they were all learning for the first time, 4 or 5 teams, how to get data. So that's kind of where it was like, wait a second, we need to set up a service, because everywhere else I'd been, there were teams of specialists who knew how to get data into the warehouse. They knew how to make sure that it was through very fast, you know, that it was presented in the right way, the structures were governed, et cetera, et cetera. And that's kind of where, you know, the whole service concept was. By having this service, you start to streamline activity through something which is efficient and allows you to basically get things through and drive that organization efficiencies that you need, right?
Yeah.
So it's about breaking down silos as much as well.
Yeah, cool. But let's rattle through to the next one. So we mentioned this before, actually. So how often organizations are set up, and can you see the slide, by the way? Yeah. So on the left, lots of organizations and data functions. I mean, lots of different non-data functions, you know, finance, all sorts, that can be set up like this, which is like a capability lead, so like data engineering lead, head of data science, whatever, and then team members underneath, and they're aligned to capability. They're centers of capability excellence. The reporting line is the team members' reporting line is to the capability lead. They may even sit in different departments or sub-departments within a data function, and there's handoffs between those capabilities to deliver a project normally, but hopefully a product. So the data ingestion team does something, moves it to the data science team, moves it to the insight team. It moves through capabilities. And that's quite inefficient, and there's lots of handoffs. And the more handoffs you've got, the more seams there are to worry about, and the more things fall through those gaps. And it's pretty inefficient. And no one therefore really cares about the end product, because what they care about is their capability. So this is where sort of product management and some of these concepts wrap together. So what we want to try and move to is on the right, which is where pods, squads, circles, whatever we want to call them, but groups of people come together who are focused and aligned to a certain outcome. They're centers of outcome rather than centers of capability excellence. The reporting line is to the person who owns that problem. So if we're solving my example before customer retention and the CMO owns that, or the customer services director or whatever, then that's who this should report to. It's a virtual team to create that outcome. And then really important, you've got the mix of capabilities working together, and people could move around these pods and change as they focus on different outcomes. So the idea here is that we move from skills to squads to be more effective and to be much more agile, responsive, and focus on product development. So we've seen that work really well, haven't we, Barry, in a number of places. Yeah.
And again, it's all about driving that cultural change, right? So you're trying to take that old established way of working, changing the way of working, and then effectively showing that you can do things a lot faster and a lot more efficiency with a new way of working. I mean, it could be agile, it could be cross-functional teams, it could just be, getting the right people in a room and saying, lock them in the room and say, you've got a week to sort this out. It's just about, it's changing the way we do things, or trying to change, the way we do something differently. And it helps start to get that cultural change embedded in the organization in terms of, we can't keep doing it, like one of your points was, can't keep doing exactly what we're doing before. We need to start trying some things that are different. And if they work, then we can scale them within the organization.
Yeah, and this ties back to what we were saying about data products and data management, data product management, because you can only really do that if the team and the function behind you and the people around you are also focusing in that way.
Yeah, great.
In a large established company like Allianz, Barry, how challenging has that been to sort of break down the idea of, I'm in a certain silo or vertical or function and move to this way, because it can be uncomfortable.
Yeah, so I mean, one of the things we're doing at the moment is a piece of work around strategic workforce planning. So we're actually trying to understand the capabilities of the people we've got, and then we're trying to run Agile as a BAU. So there was kind of a concept of everything kind of gets run like a project, and we're trying to change that through running Agile squads. But like I said, the leadership team, we're basically, by effectively having everyone go away and solve a problem and come back with a recommendation, that's also helped us to kind of get the organization to see that things can be done differently. There are other areas that are saying, wait a second, if we don't have to have all these meetings, maybe we can do things a little bit smarter. And some of these things are being adopted. Like fix forward, when you start hearing the term fix forward being used in conversations, you start to see that, that's another thing where with the organizational cultural change, people are starting to pick these ideas up and starting to kind of, do things a bit differently, or at least try doing things differently. This is not a 5-minute fix, right? This is you've got to kind of go in and out of these new ways of working, because there are established organization structures that you can't change overnight. So,
but it's back to that level up framework, isn't it? All of these concepts we talked about overlay across that level up framework, and you change at the pace of where you're at on that journey and the value that you're delivering back. And someone's asking some questions around, how do I prove that this is the right thing to do? We'll do it. Do something different, try something different, set something up in this way, even if it's a small squad doing a small piece of work, and just start to show and demonstrate the value.
And one of the things about running as a startup as well, which I think I really, really like, and I call it test and learn rather than fail fast, is that every time you try something, even if you don't get the outcome you want, you've learned something. And then the next time you create a hypothesis to try something, you're trying it on the basis of being more informed, right?
Yeah.
I've been involved. I've been in some organizations where there's a real a real fear of failure, and I think in some organisations that's super dangerous because, you know, I know myself, I've made lots and lots of mistakes, but they haven't been systemic because I've learned from them and I've kind of moved on quite quickly. And I think you've got to kind of get that culture in your organisation where, you know, not everything's going to be super efficient and get to the point where you want, but it sort of says to you, well, actually, I thought this was going to be the outcome. It's not. Why not? Let's try something different and then move again, right? But do it quickly.
Yeah. I sort of wanted to wrap up here. So whilst this isn't all about DataOps, and this is a new phrase to some people, I think a lot of what we talked about can be encapsulated by some of these ideas that DataOps starts to bring out. I'm not going to go into long. I don't think we go into long detail about this, but just sort of conclude all those points. Really, that, you know, there's modern. So DataOps is a number of things, not just DevOps for data. It's a combination of modern software engineering approaches, some of the things we talked about in terms of reusability, test automation, infrastructure as code, those sorts of things. It's about agile delivery approaches, which we talked about, product management, setting yourself up slightly differently, and cross-functional teams that are focused on valuable output, which we've talked about. So for people that are sort of new to DataOps, I think the kind of concepts we talked about really play a really vital and important part to the journey, and certainly in the level up framework, when you get to scale, this becomes a really important element. So yeah, we were going to end our sort of piece there, and I think Andy, you wanted to pick up some of the questions.
Just I'll ask a couple ones, wary of the time and stuff. Thank you both of you, by the way, for a great discussion. I thought that went really well. It's actually very nice to see you both on screen and discussing it, rather than just having the slides. So, you know, that was really refreshing and really great. So thank you very much. There's a good question here that focuses on great advice from how to work it on the data side. Is there any tips on how to get business people to buy into data analytics and big data? How do you see them? How do you make them see the value in it? I suppose that's to both of you, really, in whichever order you'd like to ask it.
Can I pick that up first?
Cool.
Yep. So one of the things we also did at Allianz was we made sure we looked at the value piece right from the word go. So anything we started, we had to have some value, and that value was either direct P&L value, it might have been better decision making, or it might have been reducing regulatory risk or reducing risk in a business. But what we don't do is we don't talk at people about data. We talk to them about their business problem, understand what their business problem is, and then we can come back and say, so do we need something new product or service to create, or can we give them an existing thing that we've got? And if it's new, then we can go away and think about, does it fit the prioritization list? And, you know, is it one of the things that we absolutely need today? But at least you can go back to them and explain, well, this is why we're not doing it now, or this is why we are doing it now, but you're going to have to front some cost up, and, you know, effectively, but make it about their problem, not about data. It's got to be about solving for their problem. As I talked about, you know, you've got to communicate and understand what's going on in the business, and that's just so fundamental.
Yeah, from my perspective, it hit the nail on the head there. You know, make this about business value, make this about solving business problems. You know, if anyone's seen me speak before, you may have heard my sort of phrase particularly around data governance, which is first rule of data governance is don't talk about data governance. And that sort of reads to this point, which is you don't get people to buy in to data, to analytics, to AI by talking about that. You go, what are we solving for? What are we going to achieve? Why does it improve your life as an individual? How does it improve the business as a overall, or most importantly, the customers that the business serves? So that's how you get buy-in. Number one way, top tip is make it about what you're trying to achieve as a business.
And also, that's why I like to focus on process as well. Because, you know, without process, data has no context, and process is what people understand. So they understand how things work, or they want to understand how things work. And so it's a good segue into understanding what the business problem is, and then understanding what data is critical to make that business, to solve the business problem they've got.
Perfect. Thank you very much. We've had a quick question here, which I'll address myself. Will a recording of this be issued? Yes, almost instantly when we finish. It's available on demand. So if you've missed the beginning, or you'd like to go over a couple of bits of Jason's slides from the beginning again, absolutely you can do that, and rewind and fast forward to your heart's content. I thought also I'd bring up the attachments we have in the bottom left-hand corner. There's some things from us. There's some of the webinars that we're running in the next couple of weeks. There's some stuff from you, Jason, as well. Do you want to say what stuff we've got attached here?
Yeah, sure. So we run a bunch of masterclasses that cover a lot of these concepts. Data strategy masterclass, which talks about and teaches the data how to build and define a data strategy. We have a DataOps masterclass, which is talking a little bit to what we were talking about earlier, but in much more sort of depth about what DataOps is, how you apply it, what you need to think about, tools and technologies. We have a data platform masterclass, which talks about how to think about architecting your end-to-end data sort of ecosystem, the roles you need, the technology you need to think about, the architecture you need to set it up. So there's some links to that, and along with our podcast as well that we run. Okay,
cool. And I'm going to put this one to you, Barry. There's a couple ones asking specifically about Allianz. Is there a use case that you could mention particularly successful, in terms of work you've done at Allianz?
In terms of data services, yeah. So data quality is always an easy one, right? So that's probably the first service we had up and running, and we haven't got all the services and all the products up and running. I just want to be clear on that, right? We're building these things like a startup, but data quality is the most obvious one, where you can basically get ownership for process, you can get people federating, tools and etc., and you can get people basically when you've got your data management tooling in place, the organization can go and have a look at what the quality looks like as well. So it ticks a whole lot of boxes around basically federating out the services and improving how to scale up, right? So for me, it's an easy and obvious one, because generally people say, I've got poor data quality, how do I fix it? So for me, that's kind of the key one.
Okay, perfect, thank you. We've got tons of questions, again more than we can cope with realistically in the time restraints, but I thought I'd end with one that's comes out of our research, really. Jason's involved in our Fourth Industrial Revolution report research. And every year we ask similar questions to data people throughout the country. And one of the things that that comes up every year is that despite the obvious benefits of data-driven strategy and these things, not as many people as you would think are doing it, since it seems obvious. And quite a lot of people are saying that, these things get start and they get canned, they fail. So what I would just like to get from both of you, if that's okay, is, what's the sort of thing that people need to avoid? What's the sort of thing that puts concrete boots on these kind of things? And what's your best, kind of one little snippet of advice to make sure that people are successful?
So for me, it's a bit. For me, it's about. So I think creating a strategy aligned to the business strategy is easy as peasy, right? If you understand the business, it's pretty easy to work out what you need and what products you might need, etc. The hard bit is the execution, which is why the whole startup mentality came, because in the past I've seen people stand up these big data governance functions, and anyone who's heard me speak knows I don't like the term data governance, but effectively, it's a thing for nothing other than data, and of course it's going to fail because it's not deriving any business value. But if you pick on a small business problem, you show that you can fix it, you show that you can make a difference really quickly, you get momentum. And it doesn't matter whether it's data, whether it's implementing process change, whether it's organization change, it's the same principle. You've effectively got to show and have an impact, and you've got to have real leadership. So there's got to be leadership at a CDO level, into the board, into the other key people in the organization, and that leadership's got to be strong, because often data doesn't have that leadership, and without the leadership it gets kicked off the table very quickly.
Yeah, mine was about aligning to business value, business outcomes. I know that sort of slightly stuck record comment from the whole of this, but I see it time and time again. Investments in technology, loads of sort of teams and engineers and data scientists, and delivering no value. And you look at the data strategy they've written, it's all about capability. It's all about, we need to put this technology in, we need to buy this data governance tool, we need to put a GDPR program in a few years back. It's all about the capabilities and or the maturity of how you go about things, and not the why. So aligning to the why, aligning to the outcome, having that North Star, having those use cases defined, clears the way for everything else. So the thing that will stop you in your tracks is spending too much money on on building the capability and not returning value and aligning that value to something that's important to the CEO and the shareholders.
Perfect. Thank you. Yeah, so I'd better take this opportunity to wrap things up. I think I'd like to thank our presenters again for a really valuable conversation and discussion around that. I thought it was a really refreshing change to the format that we've been doing with the webinars. And so it's goodbye from us. And thank you very much, Jason. Thank you very much, Barry.
Thanks, Andy.
And we'll
Thanks,
see you
everyone.
at the next one. Thank you.
Cheers.
Thanks, guys.